For those who have just joined, thank you for being here. We'll get started in about 1 minute. Okay, hello everyone. I think we will get started here and we'll start off with introductions. Stuart, I think you're up first. Please take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stuart Yasker, and I'd like to welcome you all to the conversation today. This is the third and final session of a limited series of conversations hosted by the Housing Lab, which is affiliated with the Terner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley, and the Economic Architecture Project at Ashoka. So far, our conversations have looked at innovative approaches that use collective ownership to improve rental housing and structural innovations that address appraisal bias. Today's conversation has a particular resonance with Ashoka, which was founded over 40 years ago on the belief that there are people and communities all across the world who see problems, realize they can be solved, give themselves permission to act, and will not rest until they have changed the pattern in society. In today's conversation, we have two amazing change makers who are doing just that. To take us through today's session, I'd love to pass the baton to Michelle from the Housing Lab.
Thank you, Stuart. Hello to those of you who don't know me. My name is Michelle Boyd. I run the Housing Lab, as Stuart said. It's an accelerator support program for early stage innovators in the nonprofit and for-profit sector with creative solutions for housing equity and affordability. So I'm so excited to have be in conversation today with Sam and Roshan. I couldn't imagine having this with a conversation with people who inspire me more in my work and make me so glad that I get to do the work that I do. So today's conversation is really going to focus on the two of you, Roshan and Sam, and your own stories about the work that you do. So we're just going to dive right in. As we discussed, I encourage you guys to be in conversation with each other. We've got a couple questions I prepared, but feel free to ask those of each other. For anyone here in this conversation, this is meant to be a more open, intimate conversation with these two leaders. So feel free to drop questions in the chat or use the Q&A feature. We'll do our best to answer to them as we go. The session will be recorded. Everyone attending will get a copy of it and will also live as a piece of content with both Ashoka and Terner Center website. So thank you all for being here. With that housekeeping aside, I'd love to dive in, and maybe Roshan, we can start with you. Can you just tell me, let's start off with the easy one. Tell me why you started doing the work that you're doing and what keeps you motivated as you go.
Okay, so I started working in community development and specifically around housing. I guess it's been almost 27 years ago. And I grew up in Memphis, and so I still live here and work here in neighborhoods I'm very familiar with. And I grew up in a high poverty neighborhood. My father was actually a carpenter, but was not very educated. And he got sick when we were really young. And one thing I recognized when I became an adult, and I didn't really think about it as a kid, how important housing stability and affordability are to helping people move out of poverty, but also just to the quality of life, addressing quality of life issues around health and housing, their access to food and other services that people need in their neighborhood. So it was a personal drive. I did not want other children to grow up. Not that I grew up in the worst circumstances, but I did grow up in high poverty. We didn't really have a lot of housing instability, but there were some issues with our housing that we tried to address. Our agency tries to address for other families to prevent them from having hospitalizations of their children and things that are preventable like childhood asthma. But also we want to build up neighborhoods so that people have better quality neighborhoods so they can have better housing, live, work, and play. You know, we always say that in community development, live, work, and play in their neighborhoods and have access to everything they need.
Thank you, Roshan. And just to build on that, can you share a little bit about the work that you do and what inspired you to take the specific approach you have in taking over leadership of the works?
Okay, so we are housing developers and we do quite a few things around housing. The organization was started in 1998 by the former pastor of a church, of an African Methodist Episcopal church. And the church wanted to address housing, but of course, with theology, churches don't always need to really be in the housing business because of fair housing issues. And so they created the works and started as housing. And once we started talking to people, found that we needed to address more. So we do affordable rental for very low income families, single family detached for people to enter home ownership. We ended up being a mortgage broker at some point. Now we have a mortgage loan fund, trying to address an appraisal gap we were experiencing in neighborhoods, and banks were not willing to lend in those neighborhoods where we were working. And we recently have this opportunity where we own a third of a neighborhood that was historically African-American in Memphis. It was established in 1899. And so we can control some things that we couldn't control in the other places where we were developing. We have a community land trust to deal with long-term affordability for both owners and renters. We can use our product. We have investment from philanthropic sources and some of our bank partners in our mortgage product. And so we can craft it so it fits the needs of the population that we're trying to serve. And so and then we have another opportunity where we're doing a massive rehab of a 270,000 square foot high school right in the center of this neighborhood. And part of that is affordable housing. And so when, you know, in the affordable housing world, a lot of times after the compliance period, the affordability wears off or developers don't refinance and extend their land use restrictive agreements, but we're assuring affordability into the future, 99 years. And so it's a grand opportunity that's heavily funded by a philanthropic source for us to really experiment on long-term affordability for families in African-American neighborhoods, and an opportunity for families in our neighborhoods to really experience wealth creation through home ownership.
Just one more question. I want to, Sam, give you a chance to chime in. I mean, I think you said you own a third of your neighborhood.
Yeah, so it's about 1,100 parcels, and we own 400 of those to date, and we're still buying.
So can you tell me a bit about the moment when you realized that you could own so much of your neighborhood? How did you make that happen? What inspired you to realize you could do that? And how did you make that happen?
Well, we could do it because we had access to unlimited funds. You know, the philanthropic source did not put a limit. They bought into the idea that we sold them. We were able to do it and keep, because this neighborhood is right next door to some neighborhoods with some market pressures. And so next door to us, you know, there's not an African-American neighborhood, and you're having appraisals, you know, it's experiencing what other areas are experiencing across the country, this big rise in appraised values. And so this neighborhood was threatened, its proximity to downtown and next door to these other neighborhoods, it was threatened that the market would take it over. And so how we did it, sneakily. So we had to create a lot of general partnerships because me and my partners involved in this deal, everyone knows our names associated with affordable housing in Memphis because it's relatively a small city and it has a small town vibe. And so we created all of these partnerships, and we were able to make offers you know, where the market didn't want to buy. They want to buy low and renovate and sell or rent high. So we were able to make higher offers because we had this source of funding, and we would say we can close fast. We can close in 2 weeks, and none of our names were on these FedEx letters, and so we were really aggressive around picking up these properties. And there was a lot of vacancy. And so 150 of the lots that we got through our Shelby County, our county's land bank. We did a mass transfer, so we had to pay so people did know about the 150 lots. They didn't know about the other acquisitions.
Well, I think there's a lot in there, but I do want to take a moment and have Sam he's smiling as he knows I'm calling on him to introduce himself, humbly thinking he can't follow Roshan, but Sam, you can. Sam, can you please take a moment? They can't see your screen, they can only see mine. Please take a moment to just tell us a bit about who you are and why you do the work you do. What got you started?
Okay, wait, so folks can't see me.
Now they can when you talk.
Oh, okay. No, I was bowing down to Roshan. Like, first of all, just wow. Like I'm trying to sort of collect myself. I'm blown away by like the work that you are doing over in Memphis. Just incredible, right? To pour into a community that poured into you, and to be making the difference for generations of folks. I mean, that's. I hope that you are taking time to sort of like collect all those flowers, right, and smell them. And man, God is good. Like, that's so awesome that you are doing God's work. So, wow. Okay, so I'm Sam. Sam Prater. I'm the founder of Los Angeles Room and Board, and we're focused on ending college student hunger and homelessness. And I guess what brought me to this work. I'm not from Los Angeles. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, where I was born and raised, and the 12th born of 14 kids to my mom and dad. And so, we had a good thing at our home. We were poor as I don't know what, but like, we didn't always know it. We didn't always feel it because, we were a very, very deeply religious family. There's lots of laughter and lots of love, but not a lot of resources, right? And so, I didn't really fully understand what it meant to be without, we knew that we didn't have a lot, but we didn't understand what it meant to be poor, right? Or working class, or working poor. And so, my dad, had this rule about when you turned 18, you got to get up out of the house, just because it was a 3-bedroom house. There were 16 of us living in the house, and it was just, that was just the rule. And so, didn't finish high school. And my dad, was not happy about that choice. And so you had 3 of those choices: was going to the military, getting married and leaving the house, starting your own family, or going off to college. And so, as a queer teen, I wasn't prepared to sort of get married or go to the military during the don't ask, don't tell sort of era of the military. And so my dad said, you got to go. And so experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness, I wasn't prepared to sort of like, live on my own, and got evicted twice and lived out of my car and couch surfing. And so I got some lived experience of what it means to sort of not have the security and the safety and the stability of home. And I got my GED when I turned 23, and went on to college and master's degree, doctoral degree, and so now I'm like really passionate about this intersection between higher education and homelessness, right? And so that's what brought me to the work. And worked 14 years in higher ed, working in student housing, and then watching students come to our campuses, excited about the promise of higher education. But then a semester into the experience, they're like, yeah, Mr. Sam, I'm gonna take a semester off because, this money got a little tight, and, these folks leave and you never see them ever return to the institution. Right. And that kind of outcome, right, disproportionately impacts Black and brown folks. And I got tired of seeing it. And I said, you know what, there's something I can do in a more direct way about this problem of folks being pushed out of higher ed because they don't have their basic needs for food and housing met. And so I formed LA Room and Board. And in the year and a half that we sort of like, now 2 years now that we have sort of been doing this work, we've opened up a 50-bed sort of housing facility right across the street from UCLA. It was a former sorority house. And so we are housing students there from across 15 different campuses, and providing 3 meals a day and a comprehensive set of wraparound services: tutoring, academic coaching, mental health and wellness, leadership development, mentoring, job readiness and career development, and all that kind of stuff, right? So that we can equip them with tools to become more self-sufficient, and to get through college. We know that higher education isn't a panacea, right? It doesn't solve every ill, but we do know that it is the most reliable way to move into the middle class and to give folks an opportunity to sort of like create the life that they want. And so that is what I'm about, and just happy to be here sharing space with my girl Michelle, Stuart, or Roshan. And so let's get this conversation started.
You've started it already, Sam. Thank you for sharing your story. So one thing I'd be interested to hear you both talk about is, Sam, you really stepped into leadership coming out. You were already a leader within the dorms, but to have that moment where you're like, I can start a nonprofit organization. And Roshan, I know you already were a leader in other organizations, but you stepped into the works, and then you bought the block, owned your whole neighborhood. I would love to hear you speak a little bit about what, if any, personal transformation you went through as part of that process, and how you saw yourself as the person who could stand up as a leader to try and address the problem that you saw.
So I'll start. So I did leave. I started out, it's funny because I came back home after being away in college in Vermont, which was unique that I was leaving Memphis, going to Vermont. So I already had this, I guess, belief in myself that I could make it in Middlebury, Vermont, from a high poverty neighborhood that was almost 100% African-American in Memphis. Same thing with my high school. But I had these teachers who really kind of believed in me. I had this boss who believed in me. And so I needed to believe in myself. I think I learned early on about not accepting no as an answer. And I always say to people now, because sometimes we put limitations on our children, that, my daughter used to say to me that she wanted to be a pediatrician, ballerina, and some other stuff at the same time. And I said, well, there was a first nuclear physicist, and that's before anyone knew what a physicist was or nuclear. And so I think I kind of believe that. And it's clear on my path through community development, because I was a graduate student who was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. I was just supposed to be doing a survey of community development corporations. And before my time was up in graduate school, I was the executive director of a nonprofit that was in trouble, actually. And so I had to get it out of trouble. It was a housing nonprofit, get it through some audits, get it out of trouble with the Ford Foundation, the city of Memphis, and everybody that was funding it. And I was 24. And I'm like, well, if either these people are crazy and they're letting me lead their organization, so they believed in me enough, so I need to believe in myself. And so that's how I entered the field. And I've always, since then, kind of thought, well, I can build a plane in the sky, because I didn't know what I was doing. I started out my undergraduate career in biochemistry, worked in biochemistry labs, ended up in anthropology, did Teach for America in the early years, in the early 90s and 93. It was an experiment. It was started in 91. So if I left Middlebury and went to California and then to Louisiana, I didn't know anybody anywhere. And if I can do that, I had enough belief that I could do this. And then it's at home. It's around people that I may or may not know, but they feel like family. And so it's kind of been my journey. I always have this belief that I can do things. And I go into spaces and say, doesn't matter if no one's done it before that looks like me. If I ask you for $1 million and you say no, I ask you for 999.99 cents. And so, and I keep asking, and I may keep getting no's, but a no has never killed me. And there's so much to do. And so I'm going to keep asking on behalf of myself and other people. And it's collective. My proverb is a Ghanaian proverb, I am because we are. And so I live by that, because without my community, I'm nobody. And I see a question, but I'll wait a minute to answer that question in the chat and give Sam an opportunity to talk.
Can you just rephrase the question one more time for me, Michelle, to make sure that I'm answering?
Yeah, take it where you want it, but And thank you, Roshan. I was curious to hear about the either transformation or inner energy source, as you say, Roshan, that allowed you to see yourself as someone who could start or lead an organization that could solve the problem that you see. And I think for Sam, knowing you were working as a resident, to then say, I'm going to go buy housing and I'm going to solve this problem. What was that transformation like in you? What helped, what supported that transformation?
Yeah, I would say, like what Roshan was saying, like it really is about the community. Like I think that, when I look over sort of like our short, the life cycle and lifespan of my organization in this short time, it wasn't because I felt particularly confident in my ability to do anything, right? I thought, it was just about, I saw a need, I saw a gap, and I wanted to help, but I knew I could never sort of like do this by myself, and it's always been about like the community of people who have been around me, who have been able to help me see what's possible. And I think that's kind of like how where I've always been. It hasn't been a story of like, I see this thing, I'm going to do it, and I possess, the wherewithal and all the skills and all that kind of the vision necessarily to sort of make it happen. It really had just been in community with others who were similarly passionate about the issue, who cared as much as I cared about it. And so the vision that I developed for Women Board was just as a result of like lots of conversations with others that I've been in with. I think about even my experience in the UC Berkeley's Housing Lab. I got into that cohort with one goal, about how can we sort of like affect policy, to sort of like, create more opportunities for students experiencing homelessness. And then through that experience, we ended up applying for Project Home Key, which is a revolutionary program in California, which allowed us to sort of land a $26 million contract. I did not see that for myself. It was because I had folks around me, like our coaches, like Lydia Tan and Carol Galante, Michelle, et cetera, who saw that was possible, who tapped into the vision that I had and pushed me, right, to sort of like imagine better and bigger. And so it hasn't been about my capacity. It really has been about the capacity of the community that I've surrounded myself with, who care about me, who care about students, who care about housing, et cetera. And so I hope that answers the question, but it really, I kind of like, I'm picking up on Rashawn's sort of like, the theme about community. And that really is, it's because of the we, not because of the me.
I appreciate that, Sam, a lot. And also I know that you've talked about a lot of the people who've supported you, but Roshan, you talked a bit about the no. You both have, raised exceptional amounts of money and of course have interacted with people across your journey, I assume, who haven't seen the vision that you see and who you need support from in order to accomplish what you see. Could you talk a bit about some experiences or things you've learned or strategies you've adapted to as you've tried to communicate your vision and gather support from people you need?
Yeah, and so I've been in the industry a long time, and I have some bank partners because, of course, most of our housing deals have a bit of equity and some debt. And one of my best friends in banking, who did my first tax credit deal over 20 years ago, said no to me recently because he didn't like the deal. He didn't like the neighborhood. And he's my neighbor now, so I get to walk past his house. I don't egg him. But, and now this new deal that we're trying to do, he stops. He said, so what are you doing? I said, why do you care? You did not fund my last deal. And so I had to go and seek, and I told him I had to seek a bank in Boston. We live in Memphis. You live down the street from me. And so, there are always the people in our neighborhoods experience barriers, and so do we. They don't want to give it to me, no matter how much experience I have, because it's a Black woman leading a development entity. Or they don't trust the neighborhood if it's a local bank, they're conservative. Well, and I'm like, but I've never had a loan in default. Or it doesn't fit their logic model when it comes to philanthropy, and our local philanthropy knows that. I always tell them, Rashawn does not do logic models. I'm at that point in my career now, I can say that, but I'm like, most of them are illogical. So, and they don't make sense for the people that we're trying to serve or the work we're trying to do. They're created in some academic space and they're not practical for our work. It's not always true, but often it's true. And so I just kept getting the no's, and I would go to the next person or the next group and say, well, this is why you should do it. But another way, and it kind of speaks to the question I saw in the chat about how we collaborate with our neighbors. And so even politically, I will take a group of old ladies from the neighborhood, get them the same t-shirt and rent vans and take them with me to our legislative bodies. And I'm their child. So they think of me as their child. They have a sense of ownership over me, because I always say when I'm in the newspaper, they all cut out the articles and they laminate them. And I'm always wondering where they get access to the lamination. But I have like 50 copies of an article because all of them cut it out because they view me in that way. But one way we've been able to get some philanthropic support is because we are collaborating with our neighbors, and we're not going in and saying, this is what you need and this is what we're going to do for you. We ask them what they need. And I got examples of recent philanthropic investment from our state government. We wanted to do we landed on doing a pocket park because that's what our neighbors told us they wanted us to do, with some land next to an apartment community. And we did a series of events and we asked them what they wanted to see. Well, we ended up with almost $1 million from the state to build the pocket park that they described. And before that, we ended up with our farmers market because they said food access was the priority. And this really pimped out little corner store and kitchen that they described to the architects, and we were able to use their input to get funding. And so I don't know, it kind of strayed away from the question and started talking about some other stuff, but our neighbors have really helped us get access to some funding because they said what their priorities were. They participated in our community cafes. They're our ambassadors. They are political with us. And then I don't take no for an answer.
No, I feel that. And to the point you raised about, what the challenge is being a person of color in the space. I just want to just sort of like underscore that. I mean, that is a very, very real thing in philanthropy as well, right? There have been moments where, colleagues of mine who are similarly situated will submit a proposal, and we're always sort of like talking, amongst our core group, and sometimes the hurdles we have to sort of like jump as a person of color sometimes are a few more than your white peers have to sort of like jump through. And so just want to sort of underscore that. And another thing, that's a conversation for another day. To the point about no's, my experience has been that it hasn't been, it's been like not right now. I think timing to me is everything, right? And there have been folks, when I first sort of started LA Women Board, and I was talking about, we want to talk to colleges and universities to reimagine the use of their vacant dorm rooms to sort of house folks from local community colleges who are experiencing homelessness. And I would talk to campuses, and they're like, yeah, not so much and not right now, right? Or just no, more likely. And then there'll be, foundations that we would be connected to, and we shared the idea about what we're trying to do, and it was just no. But then, there's always that one person, that one group that buys into your vision at the ground floor. And again, the way the philanthropy works, folks love to fund your idea when you're at its arc, right? There aren't many folks who want to sort of like, partner with you when you're at the ground floor, right? And then, now that we have, gone from, again, in less than 2 years, first year raising 70,000, and then if we're lucky, then in the next couple of weeks, then there'll be a total of $42 million that we will have raised. And now folks are saying, hey, remember that conversation we were having? Let's revisit that talk. And so I think that oftentimes it's an issue of timing, right? And sometimes the no's are just like not right now, right? And I've been able to sort of like folks who did not give us funding, in our first year, or even when we're talking about the idea of the Labor Women Board, who have now said, we have here, our campus, all of a sudden, we have a lot of empty dorm rooms, we'd love to partner with you to sort of figure out how to get, students who are experiencing homelessness. I'm like, you said no to me, And so it just becomes about timing, and I think that I always turn our nose, and we get a fair share of no's. We've got some really remarkable yeses, but we get a fair share of no's. But I've learned to just sort of be patient and know that sometimes for the organization that's saying no, it's about, sometimes a misalignment of their strategic priorities. And once those align, then those no's become yeses. And so that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I think, I think about Memphis, and a lot of people don't know about Memphis, but it's one of the most philanthropic cities. And a lot of that philanthropy is based in faith, whether it's Christianity or Judaism. And so this organization got its start from one of those philanthropies, the Hyde Family Foundation, because, Pitt Hyde, who founded AutoZone, and this is family foundation, believed in the minister who started the entity. So he believed in a person. He felt that he was competent, even though the organization had no experience. And so he gave them a small amount of funding, and they were able to take that little bit and I guess in the Christian faith, think about making loaves of bread from that one loaf. And I think that's true of our initiative in the neighborhood I mentioned, where we have so much control. We have an anonymous billionaire who we meet with every Thursday, not his staff, but him directly, about the millions that he's investing here, because he believes in people. And the vice president of my entity always says that foundations or people giving money should find smart people, listen to their ideas, give them money, and get out of the way. Because most of us have some proven track record to say that we're going to have some outcomes for the families we're trying to serve, or whatever it is we're trying to do. And almost every good thing, whether it's in the for-profit industry or the nonprofit industry, there is some failure involved. And in their lives, they made their money in the for-profit industry off of something and put it back into their foundations, and they failed. And so nonprofits need to have the opportunity to fail sometimes, and not have to be perfect and fake the outcomes because some philanthropic source wants them to fake the outcomes. It doesn't happen in other parts or other sectors of business. There are failures in the lab. If you're in natural science, there are failures in small businesses or even the large businesses. We just fail up. Just they have the opportunity to do that, and we should have that opportunity also.
I completely agree. And it kind of leads me to something I'd like to hear you both speak about. And so you have had failures. I mean, you two both strike me as incredibly optimistic people that's carried you through. But could you talk a bit about the failures you have experienced, how you emotionally reacted to those failures and pushed your way through, if you did react in any way, and how you pushed your way through towards the process of failing up?
Rosha, I'm gonna let you go ahead and take that. I would say I don't have a thing to name just yet, just because we're about 2 years into the game so far, and so far we've been sort of like riding this wave of like, oh, okay, win here, we'll take that W, right? And so, but I'm always sort of like trying to sort of plan for, like, if that were to happen, how might we respond? How might we develop the infrastructure to react and respond to all of our various stakeholders in a way that is appropriate, but it allows us to sort of like learn from whatever failure and mistake. But we haven't gotten to that point yet, and so, but I'm sure that's on the horizon, and I'm hoping that I'm prepared for when it comes. So I'll toss to Roshan to kind of talk.
So in housing, we failed so many times that, the product didn't end up like we wanted it to. The outcomes for the family, they didn't really build as much wealth as we thought they would build, or none at all. The neighborhood continued to decline. Over 20 plus years, I've seen all types of failures. And I have to go back to my dad. We call, in the South, we have a lot of sayings, colloquialisms, and I never understood when I was really little what he really meant. He would always say to us, and he had, 5 girls in the household. I was the middle girl. that we would find out where Sally hit the wedge. And I'm like, as an 8-year-old, I have no idea what that even means. And he said we would have a choice when we found out where Sally hit the wedge, whether we would lay and wallow in the mud, or if we would get up, dust ourselves off, and keep moving. And so I figured out what that meant over time. It was like rock bottom. And so there's going to be some failure, and we get to either, cry about it and lay on the ground and just, and not get over it, or we get to dust ourselves off and get up and start again. And so I kind of got there early on in life. And, he encouraged us to dust ourselves off. I'm an optimist in general. The glass is always half full for me, or even if it's not half full, it has something in it. So we got something to start with. And so how do I get more, and how do I share it with others so that we all have more, and I'm an anthropologist by training, and one of these, you see it on the internet now, but an anthropologist was with some African children, and they were playing a game. And it's this American idea that they wanted to give a number 1, number 2, number 3, but the children didn't have much. And so they decided to share the prize. So everybody was a winner. And so I like sharing the prize. And my philanthropist always says onward and upward. It doesn't matter what happens, it's onward and upward. And I'm like, if he thinks like that, and then my daddy told me not to lie in the mud and to get up and keep walking, whether it's a denial from a bank, it's a denial for one of our families, it's a housing product that doesn't turn out like we thought it would, or we spend way too much money and we're in a negative position. And in my early years, whether I can make payroll for myself because I needed to make payroll for others, so there were all kinds of failures, missing payrolls, houses that may have fallen because we didn't do a great job. I did a program with inmates years ago. So, we were dealing with recidivism. And so then maybe they went back in, and we didn't want that to happen for them, or the program didn't work out with the carpenters local, name it. I probably have seen it. But I decided, hey, I've learned a lesson. I'm not going to do it that way again, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to do it again, because I would have given up 20 years ago and I wouldn't be producing any housing, because this 24-year-old little girl who had never done housing, I had so many no's, and I was smaller than I am now. And I'm sitting on a book right now. I'm like 5 foot tall, a little over 100 pounds. Imagine me, 27 years ago. I was really tiny, and I was, and the people in the neighborhood even would say, I went into the neighborhood I was working in at the time. This guy who was, a substance abuser, he was a thief. He told me, he saw me, he said, I'm going to make sure you don't do anything on this street. And I was like, okay, we'll see. And he became one of my biggest advocates and best friends. And he made sure I did everything on that street. And so there were always no's, whether it was from the powers to be or the people in the neighborhood, that I could not do it. And I'm like, I'm competitive. I'm going to do it. So, yeah, there have been tons of no's.
I
Go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just get thumbs up. We won't have a like, a love button on here, just sort of.
Or like print it out and paste it above your office door.
I'm like tapping my screen like boop, 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 boop.
Well, so we've got just under 20 minutes left. I want to remind those of you on the webinar that please throw things into the chat, stick things in the Q&A. This is your time too. So if there are things you'd like to hear Roshan and Sam talk about, please let us know. And Roshan, Sam, I also want to open it up to you. If there's anything that you'd like to know about each other or things, I know you guys have met through this process, but if there's anything that you've been inspired by that you'd like to hear a little bit more about from each other, or if there's something else that you'd like to share.
Oh yeah, I'm hopping on in there. So Roshan, I wanted to kind of, what I'm thinking about now is, we started our first sort of housing sort of experience for students experiencing homelessness called the Opportunity House. And, we have 50 bed spaces there. And in the fall, we'll be now leveraging, nearly 200 bed spaces. And so last of the conversation, it is around like, how do you sort of like grow and expand at a rate that makes sense, two, that aligns with your capacity to sort of expand and to grow. And like I imagine, like just like in Memphis, right? You like when you get to own a third of the town, right? There are these, it's driven by the need, right? Like there's an express need in the community, and so you're responding to it, but trying to sort of like scale up to a place where you can sort of accommodate all the need requires some good strategy, right? And some good direction about like how are we going to meet all the need and not burn ourselves out, and not grow larger than our infrastructure can support. So walk me through like how you have managed sort of like that kind of growth.
Partners. And so in those partners, because I don't want to be everything, and I can't be, I don't even have the capacity or skill to be everything to everyone. So whether those are partners in the neighborhood, so why aren't they the ambassadors, and why don't they set the priorities for the type of work we do or what they need? And then I go out and get, if it's a social service partner, I pay another nonprofit to provide site-based services that they're good at it. I don't know how to do it. I would say I play certain things on TV. It's like a TV doctor. You don't really want a TV doctor in real life. They just know the words. And, sometimes they don't put them in the right place. And, and real doctors are like, what? The person is dead. And so I don't ever want to play certain things because it's impacting some real people. And so I then go partner and, maybe how much does it cost to do this service? And I can't do everything at once. So in this neighborhood, we're partnering with the homeowners. You already live here. So how do we invest in you? We're putting tons of money into the homes that are owned by homeowners already, because you're already here. So the same thing with tenants. So I always start with the captive audience. Who do I already serve? And then how do we get them skilled and trained to help the next person? It's kind of this each one teach one model. So the homeowners are my first ambassadors. The renters that are already there are my first ambassadors. And of course, everybody's time is valuable, so we compensate them in some way for that. We invest in their homes, a lot of money. We'll put in 50, 60,000, but here's the requirement: you need to have a will, because in African-American neighborhoods, we don't want to start over with us being able to buy another 400 parcels because they're cloudy titles or you didn't pass it along, nobody in your family wanted it. So let's get you legally able to pass your property on if that's what you choose. So we deal with all of their issues, but it's the social service partners, it's government partners, it's the philanthropic partners, it's the hospitals, so if health and housing is an issue for us, so let's partner with primary healthcare providers, keep people out of the emergency rooms. And in those partnerships, I always like to talk about mutual benefit. So if I tell the hospital, they know their numbers, a third of the people that you serve in your emergency room that cost you because they can't pay, they come from this zip code. How can you invest in this zip code so we can keep these people out of your emergency room? And so your budget, you don't have to pay, one of our local hospitals a few years ago talked about 270 million for people who could not pay. Where they were coming, they were the same people. And so let's address those same people. And so that's how we kind of, because we didn't have a big staff. When I first started at the Works, there were 4 of us. Now we've merged with another nonprofit. So you talk about a partnership that became a merger, and there are 30 of us, but we still don't have enough people for the amount of work we're doing. Right. And so we pay others to do it.
Oh, then I have one more quick question. Is that okay, Michelle? Okay, so the other quick question that I have is this. So You mentioned earlier in the conversation, this is something I struggle with too. So, we started out, our mission is about students. But invariably it's when the public funding that we get wants us to focus on, youth, just more generally speaking, right? And we have in California, we're sort of like driven by a housing first policy, meaning that we don't, the barrier to kind of access housing is very, very low. So you can't require someone to be a student in order to a youth to be a student in order to service them and provide support to them. And so then, I heard you mention, so we're figuring out how do we sort of like balance sort of like the private funding, which gives us the flexibility to do our mission the way we want to do it, and then the public funding that has all of the strings that are attached. But I heard you mention something about a farmer's market, anti-recidivism, and all the different things. And so I'm like, wow, I know that housing is so fundamental to everything, and it's such an intersectional issue. How do you avoid like mission creep or mission drift when you're like, I'm an affordable housing sort of like provider and developer, but then I'm doing the farmer's market over here, and then we're talking about folks who are doing reentry work over here. How do you sort of like stay grounded in your mission? And how do you sort of like deal with those moments when you're like, oh, this might be a bit outside of our original mission? Have you ever had that problem?
We have, all nonprofits have that problem. So, we are housing developers, but we're also in the food space and health equity, because the administrator that started our entity was a physician. So he was always involved in public health and food. But how we ended up in a farmer's market, which is seasonal, in a store, operating a store, is because our neighbors told us to. We also then built pocket parks before, but it's next door to a housing development. And so our plan from 12 years ago, they set the priorities. Some things we found that we could do, and we're the steward of that plan on their behalf. But some things we have to outsource. So we're not getting into the social services. We don't do children things. We're not great with children. And so we play well with others. And so we're really kind of clearly in the housing now policy with our merger, because we have a group of attorneys. We have 7 attorneys on staff, and health, so food, and that's where we stay. And we don't drift off, because people come to us every day to say, well, I want you. I was at a coffee yesterday, and the minister said, well, we want you to come to this neighborhood. I said, well, we're not. We're glad to partner with an agency that's in that neighborhood. They don't have to buy the lessons that we've already had. We will share all of the information, because we're trying to serve Memphians. It doesn't matter where they live. We don't, it's like wear colors, red and blue, and say, if you're not from here and you're outside of our boundaries, we don't want to help you. And so we avoid mission drift by just sticking to the things that we do well, and then we'll point them to others, warm transfer. And even that means sometimes, because we're well funded, we help to support that transfer.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thanks for that. Sorry to pepper you with all those questions. But yeah.
I'm actually intrigued by the work you're doing with the population that people don't always think about as being vulnerable. Especially, I think about a lot of African-American youth who are first generation, and they go to college. So what happens to them in the summers? Because they may be from a family of, 16?
Right.
In 3 bedrooms. You all have us, because we were a family of 7 in 2 bedrooms, in 1 bath, and girls, 5 girls and a mother, so 6 women in that 1 bathroom with no shower. So we have to take baths. And so I am very interested and intrigued by the population that you're serving, because often we think of vulnerable populations, we think of young children or parents and older people, but not often what the government defines as opportunity youth, people between those ages. And so I'm really intrigued, and we'll probably contact you after this.
Sure.
We've not done well necessarily dealing with that population, even though we're doing housing. And they need to be housed.
Yeah, and I even, so how from your lens, right, defining sort of like folks who are vulnerable, it's like our elders and our babies, which is interesting, right? Because when you think about what has happened in our country, in Buffalo, our elders were massacred, right? And just in Uvalde, right? You have our babies murdered. So yeah, I mean, that tracks with like what's happening in our country. But in terms of the homeless services space, all the attention goes to the folks who are experiencing the most acute version of homelessness, right? So our folks who are with chronic homelessness, who oftentimes may have behavioral or mental health illness that they're sort of like working through. And youth that are experiencing homelessness is almost sort of like an afterthought, right? Because that is the presentation of homelessness that gets the most attention. And so you're right, it's this sort of like hidden and secret sort of like vulnerable population within the homeless services provision that we need to sort of like get our lawmakers to sort of pay more attention to. So, well, that's definitely kicking about it for sure.
Yeah.
So I have one more question for you both, and please pull from there as well. But I'm curious what kind of a good thing, common to end on. What would you say to yourself 5-10 years ago, or maybe Roshan, when you stepped into leadership of the works, Sam, before you started LA Women Board, what have you learned about yourself or about the work that you're doing that you would want the next you to know about before you got started?
I'd say play to your strengths. I think that and part of that plan to your strength is like having an acute awareness of where you are not, things that you're not good at. and I think that oftentimes I think that what, 5 years ago, what I've told to myself, which is like don't be afraid and don't focus so much on like the things that you lack, right? God provides, the universe provides everything that you need, and be fearless and sort of like your ability to sort of say, I see a problem. Why not me? Why don't, you can do something to help solve it, not on your own, of course, but the universe will provide whatever you need, and play to your strengths. And then you surround yourself with folks who are good at the things that you are not good at. Something that Carol Galante said, we were at dinner one time up in the Bay Area, was about, hiring folks who are much, much smarter and surrounding yourself with folks who are much, much smarter than you are to get stuff done. And that is what I would have said to myself 5 years ago.
So 2 things for me, and one is going to sound weird because the first thing I'm going to say is say no. And I just said, I don't accept no for an answer. So when I started 10 years ago at the Works, the minister convinced me to be the chief operating officer of the church and the president of the Works. It was too much. Because had I focused 10 years ago on the Works, I'm thinking maybe we'd be further down the line. And the second thing is to surround yourself with people smarter than you, but also people that are as passionate about the mission of the work that you're doing. And we didn't always have that. And some of those people have gone on, great people, but they weren't as passionate around this work. Whatever portion of that work, it doesn't have to be everything, but they need to have some passion around this very mission-driven work. But say no to the mission drift potentially, and find people with passion around your mission.
I just love that say no part. That's something that I'm still learning. To your point about like partnership, oftentimes people will say, hey, let's do this thing. And because you want to come off as like a team player, and you care about like the work getting done. LA is an enormous city, an enormous county. And so, you start saying yes to everything. And then you're like, oh God, I have zero capacity and bandwidth to do any of the things I just said yes to, and so I think that's so very valuable.
And you probably said a lot of no's to some other things because you said yes to so much. I did learn that.
Saying no to the things that are important, like spending quality time with my partner, or what I'm saying, like I can't do it because I said yes to this thing that I'm, this coalition I'm now all of a sudden a part of, because I wanted to sort of like, demonstrate I'm a can-do guy, No, you put on your own air mask first. So you got to say no to some things because you need to say yes to you in order for you to do this great work. Yeah, 100%.
Well, I just want to thank both of you guys, Roshan and Sam. I know I've learned something. I've learned those printable things that, go above my office door. Or at
Don't
least the
put
top of
where
my-
Sally hit the wedge. No.
or at least let's be real, the very top of my like digital to-do list in bold, which is the version of, what I see when I start my workday. And yeah, I just want to leave it open if there's anything else that you guys want to say as we close this out. I think we have on the line, we have quite a few other entrepreneurs who may be visionaries who may be a little earlier in their time or who are running peer organizations to what you're doing. If there's anything else that you want to say or share before we close out.
I wanted to address that question, that the people that you're serving, whoever your beneficiaries are your partners and collaborators. And so someone asked about the process for collaborating with the people. We don't do this unless they're a part of it. We don't just force ourselves in. We have to be invited in, and they get to set the priorities or the rules in their house.
And then be relentless in your pursuit. This isn't easy work. It's hard work, HARD work, but like you heard the saying, but it's also heart work, right? And because it is daunting, but just be relentless in your pursuit, and things will happen. I'll never forget in 2019, there was a whole lot of no's, and I just wish we can just kind of, if one person would just believe in what we're trying to do. And we kept searching for that one person. And when we got all the no's, we didn't let it deter us. And then we got that first yes. That yes changed our lives. And so be relentless in your pursuit and don't give up. I know that sounds like some, pie in this, I'm getting platitudes, but it really is true. And I know that sometimes we say it so often that it rings hollow. But be relentless in your pursuit of what you know is right and the good that you're trying to do, and let that be the wind beneath your wings for sure.
Well, what a place to end on. Thank you, both of you. Thank you to the folks at Economic Architecture for co-convening this with us. It's been such a joy to listen to you over this past hour. And thank you for the work that you do. And I hope we can stay in conversation as you continue to grow.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Michelle. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Stuart and Michelle and Sam.
And Roshan, for sure. We'll trade information on LinkedIn for sure.
Yes.
All right, see you all.
Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your
Take care.
Thursday.
All right, bye-bye.